Please welcome our next panel. We are what we eat, the urban-rural food system, with Bronzeville Winery Executive Chef Lamar Moore, Janie Hipp, CEO of Native Agricultural Financial Service, founder and CEO of Food Systems for the Future, Ertharin Cousins, also a former IOP fellow, and this will be moderated by Monica Eng of Axios, Chicago.
All right, are these things on? Welcome to the best panel. No offense, but they told us they saved the best for last, right? I am Monica Eng with Axios Chicago. I'm so pleased to be with this distinguished panel of folks with amazing backstories and amazing histories and experience in the food world. And so without further ado, I'd like each of them to tell us a bit about themselves and their connection to urban and rural food.
Sure, I guess that means I go first, huh?
Yes.
My name is Lamar Moore. I'm the executive chef for Bronzeville Winery, not too far from here. Industry 23 years. What brings me close to farming, we're close with Nyman Ranch, also Purdue, and also a grocery store chain here. You probably heard of Mariano's. So my goal is to not just advocate as a chef, but also to stay close to farmers, because we're big on, making sure our food is no longer than 250 miles away from the restaurant. And I'm also in the process of working with City Colleges of Chicago at Olive Harvey College, where we're also building our own produce through a third generation farmer.
Thanks so much. And can you tell us a little bit where you grew up?
Oh, I'm a Southsider, absolutely.
Southside!
If you're a Cubs fan, you got to go. No, I'm kidding.
All right.
My name's Ertharin because I was stunned when he said he was a Southsider and a Cub. Because West Side, darling.
All right.
Okay, sorry.
All right.
My name is Ertharin Cousin. Some people say Ambassador Ertharin Cousin. I served as U.S. Ambassador for Food and Agriculture and the Executive Director of the United Nations World Food Program. I was the Deputy Executive Director of what is now Feeding America during Katrina. I worked in retail food for almost 10 years. I now started an organization called Food Systems for the Future in an attempt to end malnutrition. When I started the organization, it was very much about looking at how do we bring market-based solutions to access to affordable, nutritious food in low-income and emerging economies. And I was at an event just like this one in the early days of our organization, and a young woman, like many of you, stood up and said, "That's all really good, but what are you doing about what's happening here in the United States?" Mm-hmm. And so we stood up a team here in the United States, and we're working on issues related to grocery deserts, not food deserts, because every community in America has food. It just doesn't have access to affordable, nutritious food. And so we're looking at what works and how can we change that. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And she's my sister. We met during COVID, and we've tried to find ways to hang out together since then. My name is Janie Hipp. I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation. I was born on Camp Pendleton, and I was raised in Idabel, Oklahoma. The entire county of that place is rural. Still is rural. There were 5,000 people in the whole county, and it was the largest county in the state. Very remote, deep in the Choctaw Nation. But I came up through agriculture law and policy. I'm an agricultural lawyer in the 1980s during the farm financial crisis, all caps. That was a thing, a big thing. But I have been on an agricultural law journey since the early 80s, and in various capacities. I've stood up quite a few indigenous food offices and programs and this, that, and the other, and I can go through all that, but I don't think you're here to hear all of that. But I, most recently, before I moved over to become the CEO of the Native Agriculture Financial Services, served as the general counsel at USDA in the early years of this administration. So I'm very pleased to be here. Glad we're talking about this, and we could stay here, Monica, until 10 o'clock tonight.
Yeah, are you guys all down for that? Well, I am a city girl. In fact, Ertharin and I went to the same high school.
A lot of years in between when she was there and I was there.
We're both Lane Tech girls. But I've spent time, I lived on an Uzbek cotton collective farm for a year and a half while my then husband was doing his dissertation. And so I felt like I know the farming life. I've covered food policy for many decades. And I remember one time the Farm Bureau calling me when I was at the Tribune and saying, Monica, why do city dwellers hate farmers so much? And I said, well, that's so weird because I was just on a call about a new calendar coming out, like 12 hot farmers, and the Green City Market crowd are like so into it. And she goes, I'm not talking about specialty farmers who go to farmers markets. I'm talking about commodity farmers. And so when we talk about rural people and when we talk about agriculture, I think there are different worlds. There are those folks who want to sell you their heirloom tomatoes for $20 a pound, and I'm there buying them. And then there are folks who have very, very slim margins as well with corn and soy and hogs and chickens. And I think the reason why this conference is happening is because there is this huge divide. We're so divided politically, and a lot of that does fall along urban-rural lines. And I think food is also part of that. You know, I don't understand why it has to be this dichotomy between those who grow heirloom tomatoes and those who grow corn and soy, but it is there, and we're eating all of it. You know, the corn and soy goes into food that we actually eat, or our gasoline. And so here we are trying to figure out commonalities. When the Tribune sent me to become a hunter, they said, Monica and our outdoors writer, Barbara Brotman, you two are the least likely people to shoot a gun in the newsroom, little do they know. So we're gonna teach you to become hunters. So they had us working for a year and a half with rural gentlemen who could not have been farther from us politically, but we sat in hunting blinds for hours and hours on end, and they hosted us in their homes. And the one safe topic was food. We traded recipes like crazy, and we also talked about our deep love for conservation. All of us felt like it was important to leave that forest we were in better than we found it. It was important to protect the soil, and it was important actually to protect animals. It doesn't sound like it when you're hunting, but you know, there's conservation involved in hunting. And so I think that's what we're here to talk about, commonalities, but also challenges and solutions. So let's start with what is the biggest challenge when it comes to our food system, you know, and bridging that urban-rural divide? Who'd like to start? Ladies first?
I'll start, and I could go on and on and on, which I will not do.
We'll stop you.
For me, one of the biggest challenges right now is financing. It is. We were talking previously. Every single time this country or the world goes through some economic upheaval, the finance situation tightens. And when you tighten on agriculture producers, farmers, ranchers, I don't care what you grow, where you grow it, how you grow it. When you tighten that up, then the margins the margins are so tight in agriculture production that every time that those screws do like this, you're forcing more farmers and ranchers out because they literally don't have the terms of a financing infrastructure that actually meet their needs. And at the same time, you've got heightened risk. I mean, being a farmer and rancher is risky. And we are now down, I mean, thank God we have the Farm Credit Administration and FSA because we need them. We absolutely need them.
Can you tell folks what FSA is?
FSA is Farm Service Agency at USDA, which is one of the 2 lending banks within USDA. And they do agriculture production, basically, loans. But the Farm Credit Administration was created over 100 years ago. They only lend in agriculture and rural. There are other banks that do it, but not to the degree they do. And we have come to a place in this country where the finance that we provide to agriculture people needs to be long vision. We need to invest in the people and the place if we intend to have it around. And it's just when you're tightening things up so tight, then you're not allowing people to thrive.
Right,
so let me build on what you just said, Janie. Janie and I met on a Zoom panel in the height of COVID and have been partners in crime since then. And so you'll hear us building on each other a lot. But finance and that lens that you talked about, that risk lens in rural areas, is the exact same challenge that we have in urban communities that limit access to food, the investment in businesses, is that risk lens that is used by commercial financiers in the determination of where capital flows. And so it doesn't flow into urban areas, just as it doesn't flow into rural areas. But these are not conversations that you have with rural business people, farmers are business people, or business people in the urban areas. We don't talk to each other about the shared challenge of access to commercial capital because we don't see it as the same problem when in actuality it is. It is that those who have the power to make the decisions about where capital flows sees both of these communities in the same lane, in the same light, with limited potential for significant return. And as a result, the challenge of moving commercial capital into those places is quite limited. And some would say, well, you have new ag tech tools and food tech tools that are coming online that Silicon Valley VC capital is investing in. They're not investing in urban entrepreneurs or rural entrepreneurs that are supporting low-income communities for access or low-income farmers for production. The tools that are coming online for affluent farmers and affluent consumers. And the fact that those who work in urban areas will argue that this is a racism issue, not knowing that the exact same issues, and I'm not suggesting that there may not be some of that, but the reality is that the lens for determining risk are just as challenging and just as limiting for urban white rural farmers as it is for rural white farmers as it is for urban entrepreneurs who are trying to bring food access into these communities.
Okay, access to capital, financing. What other big challenges are you seeing, Lamar?
Well, before I answer that, you guys went to Lane Tech with Yvonne Steuben, so just want to throw that out there.
We played you.
Yes, we did. We beat them badly, regularly, but.
For sure. One of the first challenges is consistency and authenticity. In urban areas, it's a challenge when, you're trying to find product and not knowing what you're getting and what you're looking for. And to piggyback on both of what you're saying, when you talk about, the financial reach, it's very difficult when you are in an urban area, and I'm going to speak a little bit more on the culinary side and as a chef, and in a restaurant, and then looking at the grocery stores and not knowing, what it is to buy or how to buy, but then you go into in more affluent areas and looking for, great produce. You talked about the heirloom tomatoes. Most people don't know what an heirloom tomato is. I spent, 10 years of part of my career in California where everything was at an abundance, and that's from the top level down to what is considered the bottom level. And it's also a challenge being here in Chicago where, We talk about the Midwest, but the Midwest is surrounded by things that you can get and a lot of things that you can't. So trying to, figure out what that reach is and then being consistent with that, you have to go by what you hear, not what you see, because there's not enough to be seen, but a lot to be heard.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right, well, so we've talked about challenges. Let's get on the happier side, solutions, promising solutions that you guys have seen. Last time I saw Lamar, we were at Hog Appreciation Week in Des Moines, and we were visiting farms, hog farms, where these hog farmers, if they could meet certain standards, they could sell their hogs for a premium to the Niman Ranch network. And I see that as a really fascinating solution for people who are just making, pennies in profits, to giving them a pathway to stay on the farm and make a better product, a product that frankly the farmers told us they were proud of the way they treated the land and the hogs. Who'd like to start with some solutions that they think are?
Yeah, let me start with the fact that there is no a solution. Right. The solution to addressing access to affordable, nutritious food and addressing challenges of food insecurity, nutrition, addressing the challenges of farmers and production, sustainable production to support both environment and human health, we need a diversity of solutions. And it will take that full platform of solutions that are specific to context that will ensure our ability to truly perform the transformation of the food system that is necessary to support equitable access to affordable, nutritious food that is sustainably produced, that provides for economic returns for all actors, from the farmer to the investor. And so to suggest that if we talk about organic farming or regenerative agriculture or addressing the challenges of food deserts, we need all and.
I would say, going back to what you're saying about the hog farming, I've spent the last year and a half working beside Niman Ranch. And what's been great about that, not only with Niman Ranch, but working with the grocery store chains. And when I look at what we do in the restaurant, this restaurant, Bronzeville Winery, is about 10 minutes from here, and it's in an urban area. And so we take pride in not only I visit probably 20 farms a year. And one of the great things that I see now is being able to actually talk to a real farmer. During COVID changed how we operated as a restaurant, how grocery stores operated. And over that time, we became very, very separated, which caused some of the financial restraint that you talk about, and where FSA has offered some opportunities for farmers to really, really dig into, what that looked like, as a farmer, and then being able to allow us the opportunity to expand on what we call farm to table. And now a lot of restaurants are going back to, the natural roots of farm to table. When we talk about Niman Ranch, for example, one of the biggest things that attracts me to them is that the no nitrates, the no antibiotics, it's antibiotic free, and that then gives us a healthier sense of what we're serving. And that then allows us, as restaurateurs or chefs or businesses, that I'm putting this product in a restaurant, and if you go to the grocery store chain, you can then see some of those same products, because for that farmer, they have to be able to not just sell to one, but sell to all as much as they can, and not using it as a commodity, but as an opportunity to really, showcase, what a farmer does. So I think that, to your point, it's not just one answer, but there's multiple answers. It starts from the investor, it starts from the areas, it starts from the agriculture, but also when we talk about Niman, specifically at the pig has to eat well, and being able to be humanely taken care of, which has also been some concern and issues in the past that I feel like, have been corrected over the years. And now, watching Niman, work closely with Purdue, then now there's a bigger reach and a bigger understanding of not just, a namesake, but also putting a name behind, what the farmers do. And I can actually look at a farmer and then go down to, like we did at the hog farm, and then really, really get enriched as to see the change. And also understanding that, also in the Midwest, we're built around farms, but I don't think a lot of people know that. But now, when I look at menu acumen, those are things that I put on the menu. Those are conversations that I have. Those are reasons why we sit here, having a conversation about what that looks like and being able to expand on that, as a chef.
I want to take the group into my world just for a second. I've had the distinct pleasure of working with indigenous farmers and ranchers all over the country, as well as tribal governments. 30 some odd years ago, when I started doing agricultural law, I could call a tribal headquarters and ask for the ag people, and it wasn't clear. There wasn't any consistency about who they would send me to. That is not the case now. This is like, I've never seen it like this across all tribal nations in this country. But what I'm seeing, and what we have the joy of watching happen is this resurgence and reimagining what our communities can do in the agriculture piece. And for us, it goes all the way to honoring our food history, right? And honoring the kinds of crops that we grew when no one else was here but us and our ancestors, but taking it all the way through to today. And we have right now tribal governments that are deciding that, given the number of livestock producers they have, right, in their communities, or given the amount of fishers they have, or given the amount of orchard folks that they have, you just name it, because we're out there growing it, raising it. But they're seeing their role quite differently as the tribal government, which is they purchase a lot of food, and they have businesses that purchase a lot of food. And so that conversation is starting to be internalized within a lot of tribal governments, going, how can we be more deliberate? And what you're seeing is in our choices, in our decisions, and how we follow through. What you're actually, in the middle of COVID, there were 3 tribes in Oklahoma that stood up in the middle of COVID, processing plants, meat processing, because their people are heavily tied to livestock issues. There was one before that, before COVID, but 3 stood up in the middle of that. 1 stood up in 9 months' time, which is unheard of. You do not stand up that complex of a thing in 9 months. All of them are still running.
You mean a slaughterhouse, just for the common.
Right. I choose not to call it that. That's not what we call. Yeah. Anyway, but those are small operations. They're small to mid-sized max. They're multi-species, and people in our communities know how to humanely live in partnership with the four-leggeds that are a part of our family. And so we inherently do this in a different way. But we're also operating, when you open those up, you also open up relationships with the rural producers who are in that region, because they're like, oh my God, somebody actually is doing this, and we can actually show up, and we don't have to cart our animals all the way from Oklahoma to Colorado and then back again. So what I'm seeing, and I get excited about it, obviously, is this realization by the tribal businesses, but the tribal governments and the people who are the farmers and ranchers all talking to each other, no matter whether they live urban or rural, and literally saying, how are we going to do this together in a more intentional and deliberate way? And those things are happening all over the place.
When we were in the green room, we had that discussion. It sounds boring, infrastructure, mid to small level processing plants, but it's so important. And anybody who bakes bread in this room, probably started during the pandemic, like everyone did. You may know this mill in Kankakee County, around there in Ashcombe, called Janie's Mill. And they've got this incredible story. This gentleman named Harold, his daughter Janie died of cancer. He was a conventional farmer, conventional corn and soy farmer, and her dying wish was, Dad, can you please stop using all these chemicals on our farm, and can you please convert to organic? He did that, and he built a mill in his town, And now he's got heritage grain producers from all over the Midwest. He grows them of his own. Every time I pick up my daughter at U of I get a sack of rye from them. And it has become such a booming business to have, again, this mill in their area that people can bring their grains to if they're of a certain quality and sell them at top dollar to Chicagoans who want to make some sourdough or some rye bread. How important is it to start building up that infrastructure in these rural communities again to build back the main streets, to build back the local economies?
Well, it's exactly, what you just talked about and why we've decided to work, with a third generational farmer. I mean, I've been in this business over 20 years, and even my time in California, I can't say that I know a third generational farmer. And there are opportunities like this. I work closely here with the University of Chicago, talking about, education and sustainability, and being able to do that not just as a South Sider, but also do it on the South Side, and then going further at Olive Harvey College. A young lady, she has a produce and grain company on the west side, and she's a scientist, and then working with her and then her third generational farmer, our thought is if we, as we do believe in farm to table, I feel it's my duty to not only understand what they do as a farmer, but then to be able to take them from that farm and put them at my table in the restaurant, and then to take that table in the restaurant and bring them to that farm. And the only way that I can do that is embody what I know, being to bridge both sides of that table, but watching this third generation farmer on the outside of a college literally build from the dirt up, and then seeing how they naturally grow grains and herbs and spices and what we need and what we're looking for. And then from a restaurant, then to be able to explain that to the guests, and then from the guests to the grocery store. And I think that there's been such a disadvantage on our culinary and agricultural ecosystem. And now we're able to put that back together and show the importance of why the farmer is doing what the farmer is doing. And I think you brought up a great point about, the naturalization of the animals. It's the same thing from the dirt. And I think that, something as simplistic as explaining that a carrot and a parsnip is the same. One has sunlight, one doesn't. And a lot of people don't understand the simplicity of that. I think I spoke recently, actually here, I think like 2 weeks ago, and I was explaining how I brought in an oxtail, and I asked, if people knew what oxtail came from, and they said it was an ox. And not, not understanding why and where that comes from.
Deceptively named.
Absolutely. But being able, and I think the other piece is going back to our natural root. We're also taught to think simplistically, but I think, from the societal standpoints and the lack of education, which goes to those financial pieces, we have now forgotten, how simple, a farmer's job is, how simple it is to buy the right product, how simple it is to understand why that's organic and why it costs that amount of money.
Some things aren't so simple.
And I appreciate exactly what you said about taking it into the consumer. I was talking to an Iowa farmer who said to me, I grow what people buy. What they buy, I will grow. The challenge that we have as we talk about changing the economics of the farm by changing what farmers produce, what they're subsidized to produce, we're not having that same conversation with consumers, with eaters. And if eaters are not demanding certain products, then the market will not exist for the farmer to sell into, which makes it completely unsustainable and lacks any form of resilience. And so the narrative that we build needs to be one that goes from farm to fork in order to support the changes that are necessary.
I think the media does bear, I've written a zillion stories, but people should read more of them, but they do bear some responsibility to try to teach people, here's what the real cost of food is, and here's why you should buy it. Because as we were saying, there was a panel at the conference saying that there was a real surge at one time of people saying, I want to buy pastured meat, I want to buy organic meat. But then as food costs rose during the pandemic and inflation happened, they saw people backing away from that more expensive meat. Well, when I would do story after story about why aren't you raising your meat without antibiotics, why aren't you pasturing them? The farmers would say to me, Monica, you know when I'm going to start doing that? When every survey I see from the consumer doesn't say my number one priority is cheap, cheap, cheap. If we as consumers keep saying we want our meat cheap, the farmers will not change their practices, or the most of them won't. They said, look, you tell me that the price is your number one priority, then I'm going to do everything I can to make that cheap. And if people knew what all of that was, I don't think they'd like it.
Well, can I jump in here? Because I'm going to strangle you, Monica. Here's the reality. There's lots of advocates in the food systems transformation community right now arguing for the true cost of food. That the price of food that we pay should reflect the cost, both the medical cost for how we grow it, the land costs, and the cost of production, which is estimated to increase food on average between 20 and 25%. That's on top of the prices that we're already seeing because of inflation. Who suffers? Mm-hmm. The poorest will suffer. The answer that you get in response to that is then we need more SNAP dollars. We need more. We have a challenge avoiding SNAP getting cut, let alone talking about increasing federal subsidies for food purchasing. So the suggestion that the answer to addressing the agricultural challenges is increasing the cost of food to consumers,
it's not going to go.
An unreasonable burden on those who can least afford. And it is an affluent response that does not look at the fact, and I'll finish with this, doesn't look at the fact that 85% of all farm subsidies today go to 15% of the farmers. The kinds of foods that we're talking about, the specialty crops, the organic produce livestock and crops, they receive a smaller now subsidy than they receive a greater subsidy than they did 5 years ago, but it's still not enough to support maintaining the cost of food to ensure that food remains affordable. So this is not we need to avoid conversations that pit our rural community solutions against our eaters, particularly the poorest.
Yeah.
So what is the solution?
Oh boy. I'm going to tell you what I think the solution is, because we talked about it previously. If you actually look at what this country has done over time in agriculture and food policy, the last real conversation we all had about ag and food policy was at the beginning of the 1900s. All right? Most of the I'm an ag lawyer. Most of the ag laws were written in that window before 1940. So we're talking about a period that was in the teens, and then we're talking about World War I and II, and we're talking about the Great Depression, and we're talking about the Dust Bowl. And if you think about all the issues we're talking about here, they all can have some parallels, but it was all 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. And we have put Band-Aids on our agriculture and food policy ever since then. And we have this fragile coalition on the Hill, I think, Ertharin, of putting the eaters with the farmers and trying to get a farm bill passed every 5 years, which we desperately need. But at the end of the day, we have yet to actually have a serious conversation about all of these issues in such a way that prepares us for the next 7 generations. We don't do that. We wait until the next crisis happens, and then we slap another Band-Aid on, and then we start to complain about how it doesn't work. The reality is we're not doing what we need to do. And to think about this, you know, I love urban ag. I love me some urban ag. That is not what I'm saying here. But most of the food is still grown in rural and remote places around the country. And so how are we going to actually bring all of those voices into the conversation? Because otherwise, we're just all gathering up in state capitals and the nation's capital and forcing our opinions on the actual people who are going to have to do this. And oh, by the way, the last ag census, we're declining in the number of farms, y'all. Mm-hmm. And I'm not working at USDA anymore, but our current secretary is taken to going around with a whiteboard. and he does that, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And this is how this works, people. I mean, he doesn't say it like that. But y'all know what I'm saying here. And otherwise, we're going to keep chasing our tails about what is the next big thing and the next thing we can all feel happy about in this space when we're really not talking about the fundamentals. And the fundamentals include everything.
We don't have a food policy in the United States. We have an agriculture policy. And unlike Canada and the UK that have actually developed, and even the UAE, food policies that cover everything from farm to fork. Ours is still divided into different agencies, USDA, FDA, some even in EPA, some and so the opportunity to have that dialogue needs to begin with having a Congress that recognizes that in order to address these challenges between urban and rural and eater and farmer and everything in between, is that we need a food policy.
Yeah, Congress is going to get a lot done really soon, I think. But no, didn't Jose Andres, didn't he convene the very first food conference, or the first one since Nixon, last year? I guess it didn't get...
Yes, we did, and USDA was not involved in it.
What the what?
Because it was not an agriculture conference, it was a food conference.
But this is what drives me crazy. I'm sorry, I'm jumping right in here. Sorry. The only department in the federal family that even gives a rat's ass, excuse my French, about rural America and has the centralized bulk of the rural programs is the Department of Agriculture. And the idea that they were not included is ridiculous.
That is kind of crazy. What's the big hot button issue for the presidential race? Well, one of them, migration. And yet, immigrant labor is something that I think unites the urban and rural area right now. I did a story recently about work permits for migrants in Chicago, how fewer than 10% of them have them, and probably fewer than 10% are going to get them. I got a call from someone who's got a huge orchard in Southwest Michigan and said, Monica, where can I find these folks? I am going to have fruit on the trees that it's never going to be picked because none of the farm kids want to come out and help me anymore. I need immigrant labor. And I think we all know that our food system, the fact that we can afford any food, is all based on the back of immigrant and largely undocumented labor. How can we bring these two together through labor, migrant labor?
Well, I think that's unfortunately going to be a slippery slope because of how it's one thing when you have an opportunity to learn something. It's another thing when you're forced to do it.
Yeah.
And to tie both conversations in, you can't have a complication without conversation. And I think a lot of our communities, have forgotten that we don't have a voice. And meaning that you got to talk to, or we need to talk to our aldermen and our congressmen to really force those conversations about what the community needs. Because the whole point of a community is to hire in and out. I can't, when I build a recipe, I can't build it out and then bring it back in. It's not going to work. And so, the migrant conversation is going to continue, but until we centralize what exactly we need here first before we can bring someone else in, it's always going to be overly convoluted on what that looks like. And then you brought up another great, point about the undocumented, labor. That's always going to be around because that's just what we do. And I've seen that more gradually in California than I do see here because of just, the sheer, amount of borders. And I think, again, when we look at, the labor and food is always the biggest things we talk about in restaurants. And now that's a huge concern in our agriculture, which is why when we have a price hike, then everyone's, well, I won't say everyone, but some of the speculation is why are we paying so much? Well, I can't build food if I don't have labor behind me to do it. Mm-hmm. And then my labor continuously increase on what I'm doing. So if I get pinched in the front, the goal is for not the guest to be pinched as well. But then if you have some areas that they're just going to pinch you because, and then we're serving the same product, I'm going to take a hit as a small business owner. My farmer is going to take a hit as a small farmer. So now we're both trying to figure out the same pricing, but then in the rural areas or the other areas, they can charge whatever they want because they have the labor, they have the money to back it up, they have the investment, and I can keep going with the have. But there's no balance in what that looks like. And from the migration, it's easy to go out than in, as opposed to in and out. So until we, like you said, from the USDA, have a real conversation on what that looks like in a lot of the areas, till we have a real conversation of like, why don't I see a grocery store, but I see a dialysis center? Mm-hmm. So how can I say...
It's actually, they're connected.
Right. How can I say I'm going to build in, but there's not a store here, but again, there's dialysis center, there is, all the unhealthiness that are surrounded in these communities, but nothing to build off of what that looks like. Can they go hand in hand?
Mm-hmm. We could talk for a zillion years, but I guess we're down to 10 minutes. So folks, start lining up at those mics, and we'll take the first question over here on the right.
Hi, my name is Ryan Hudson. I'm here representing Colorado State University. And I was wondering, given your different roles and perspectives within our food system, I was curious to hear where you see the most waste, and if you could snap your fingers and change one thing to help reduce that waste, what would it be?
All right,
You're talking about food waste?
Yeah. About 30% of all our food is still going in the garbage. So at the
Shame
farm level, at the transportation level, retail?
Yeah,
home?
in the U.S., 60% of food waste comes from retail and household food, and much of that, if you ask what would we change to reduce it, it's consumers' desire for perfectly looking food. If it's bruised, we toss it.
If it doesn't look right, it doesn't end up on shelves.
It doesn't end up on the shelf. And so ugly food is still good quality food. And so again, that's back to changing consumer demands for what they consume.
Well, and as my great aunt used to do, born in 1900, if I can't eat all that I order at your restaurant, I take it home.
Yeah, don't be ashamed to do a doggy bag. I bring my own container.
So we throw away so much food, we should be ashamed of ourselves, kind of across the board. To have any child in this country go hungry is shameful, given how much we throw away.
But waste reduction programs are advancing.
Right, they are, not fast enough.
Lamar?
I mean, I'll tell you just as fresh as I can. Well, one, we do preservation because that's what I learned. Two, we do family meal because just as you said, it's important, our employees are our family. And like before I came here today, I spent time in Inglewood and Chatham and I did lunches for 200 senior citizens. And so anything to look at when we talk about food, we have to remind ourselves to be advocates of what we talk about. And work closely with the Illinois Restaurant Association. It's important to me and to our restaurant, even as a small business, to still be able to say, hey, we have this amount of food, before it goes bad, then where can we put it? Where can it go? And I think, when we talk about supply and demand, the stores are just going to drop everything out based off a number. And we have to remind ourselves that people are not numbers, they're people.
I was astounded to hear that grocery stores build in that they're going to lose X amount of this produce because it's got to look plentiful. It can't look like Soviet Russia. It has to look like piles of gleaming apples, and you're not going to be able to sell all those. And so I think we have to change our expectations of what that display should look like and what that carrot should look like. Maybe it has a few things sticking out of it. It all goes to the same place. All right, on the left.
Hi, I'm Haley. I'm from White Earth Tribal and Community College. And I've seen huge food sovereignty and security issues on my reservation. My tribe owns 7% of reservation land. A lot of it has been stolen by big agriculture. Fields and fields of corn and soy and no fresh food to be found. So I was just wondering what advice you guys would have for a person trying to, get into the sector and improve food sovereignty and security for my people and for the next 7 generations.
I think that's yours.
This too. I used to, I still do, gather up with students like yourself, and except for the students that I gathered up with were in high school and junior high, and I would look them square in the eye and I would say, no one has to be 40 before you begin your activities around food sovereignty. Go do it. No one. Where is it written that a 12-year-old cannot go to her tribal council and say, no, we're not doing this. We have to do it differently. Of course, respectfully, you know. But I can tell you story after story of young Indigenous activists in the food sovereignty space who at the age of 14 have walked into their tribal council and said, we're doing this differently. And so I just think you have to be bold, and you have to not take no for an answer, and you have to do the hard work of rolling up your sleeves, figuring out where food is moving in your community, and strategizing every step of the process. It's a lot of brain stuff, but it's also just getting a landscape. You talk about landscapes all the time. It's getting a landscape view of what's happening right within your community, and then figuring out, to your point, Ertharin, again, what is the unique fix that can help where I am? Because they're all the fixes are going to be different.
Anybody else before we go to the next question?
I'll just add, you're absolutely right, but it's not just on the on tribal lands. It is in urban communities, it is in rural communities, we need more young people in agriculture. Yes. We have, whether the average age of a farmer in the United States today is 62? And as a result, we don't have that voice that is necessary. And so the challenge of this is not easy work. From farm to the restaurant, these are hard jobs, but they're the jobs that we need the next generation to see as opportunity.
Got it. All right, on the right.
Hi there, I'm Tiffany White. I'm the executive director of the Dirksen Congressional Center, located in central Illinois. But my other title is that I'm a mom of 3 school-aged children who attend public school in our community, where more than 50% of those students live at or below the poverty line. And as a result of federal policy, all of those children are entitled to free lunch in the public school system, including mine. And in an effort to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, those lunches are cheap, they're not nutritious, and what I worry about is, I think that the bedrock of good mental health and physical health is nutrition, which is the bedrock of academic achievement and economic achievement. What, from a policy perspective, do you think is possible? Or maybe not a policy perspective, but what can communities do to put more nutritious food into the school system as a way of meeting those students where they are and setting them up for real achievement instead of just filling that little hole of hunger in their bodies?
It's a tough nut to crack. I covered this for a decade at the Tribune. And some of the top chefs in Chicago, like names you all know, they went to the White House. Sam Cass was there, and he got them all pumped up. And they're like, yeah, we're coming back to Chicago. We're bringing food trucks to all the schools. We're going to go in there and cook. And I had been covering this for 5 years, and I'm like, guys, I don't want to crap all over your idea, but there's no freaking way you're going to be able to do that. Chartwells Thompson owns this contract. You take away a penny from them, they will sue your ass. And they came up against it, and now it's a terrific program. It's called Pilot Light. They do food education, but you are not allowed to change the food. And I don't want to be like, oh, it's totally impossible, because there are some great models out there. You can talk to me afterwards, and I'll send you stories about some great models. But it's hard. These are multinational corporations that they get per lunch you take. It's a very profit-motivated system. For every kid who takes it, cha-ching, they get some money. So when I started this investigation, what were they feeding the kids to make sure the most kids took that lunch every day? Every single day at Lane Tech High School, for your entire 4 years, you could get fries, nachos, and a chocolate milk. I brought that to the Undersecretary of Agriculture at the time, and I said, did you know that this is what the National School Lunch Program is paying for? Fries, nachos, and a chocolate milk every single day. He said, it's baloney, Monica, I don't believe you. I sent him the menus from online. Lane Tech now can only serve that, well, the whole CPS can only serve that 1 day a week, and lots of kids hate me for it. So you can embarrass the district by bringing it up. Take a look at the menus and say, is this really what we want? I had Sam Cass, and then CPS went totally overboard. They said, well, we will never put an ounce of a crystal of salt on any vegetables. I told that to Sam. He gave me great tape when I was at WB. He said, for God's sake, put some salt on that broccoli. Because you want kids to like broccoli. You don't want them leaving loving nachos and hating broccoli. So be a nosy parent, get involved, take a look at those menus and maybe find a local reporter and say, is this really what we want to be training our kids, especially the most vulnerable, those who are dependent on that lunch, to be eating for the rest of their lives? Because we're going to be paying for dialysis treatment for the rest of their lives.
My kids are very happy that I'm traveling this week because I'm not home to make them lunch, so
Right.
they get school lunch.
Exactly.
And the only thing I'd add is that California is an interesting state in what they did after COVID. With COVID, free lunch, universal school lunch was one of the programs during COVID. And California made the decision that they were going to maintain that program after COVID. And so they made it a budget item for the state budget. They've also included in the state budget putting kitchens back into schools.
Exactly. So
to
people can
support
cook food.
actually cooking food in schools. But those are policy decisions that were made, and there are trade-offs in other areas that California made, the decisions that they made. But it is the issue of the First Lady of California is nutritious school lunch. And so you need that kind of political leadership to drive the type of change when you have the interests, that the longstanding financial interests of a few that you're up against as a mom. And so you need political support. And this is something that I'm excited about school boards in Chicago, the opportunity for us to begin to have these kinds of discussions.
Question.
Yeah, hi, my name is Sylvie Babbitt. I'm a student here at the University of Chicago. So I grew up cooking and working in restaurants, and I have the privilege of knowing how to make affordable, healthy food for myself and for others. And in my experience, a massive issue isn't just access, but it's access to the information necessary and access to the time. How does a mom of four with working 2 jobs have time and know how to make healthy, nutritious, cheap food? So I'm wondering if any of you have ideas for initiatives and ways that we can start to tackle that problem.
Well, I have an idea. Everybody can steal it if they want. Okay, what do we have? We have an issue of kids after school not always having safe places to be. We have parents not being able to always cook healthy meals. We have kids who grow up without home ec and not knowing how to cook. And what else do we have? A freaking big infrastructure of now some kitchens in schools. The kids stay after school 2 to 3 hours. They make a giant pan of vegetable lasagna or rice and beans. They have a safe place to be. The infrastructure's already there. They come home, hey, look, Mom, I've got a tray for us tonight and a tray to put in the freezer. You have Mariano's and Jewel maybe donating extra stuff that they have. And you have volunteers teaching. I think that could be an incredible program with infrastructure that's already there, solving 3 big problems. Nobody's taking me up on it, but if you have any funders out here, think about it.
I want to say one thing too before we disband. We need to start telling our young people that there's nothing more important than feeding someone else. It's that simple. We have spent decades and decades telling young people, get out of here, you don't want to be a farmer, you don't want to be a chef, you don't want to do this, you don't, oh, no, who does that? And occasionally we'll have a little flare up of sexiness around food, but at the end of the day, we have forgotten to tell our young people, to try to impress upon them that there's no more important thing than you feeding someone else. It shows an expression of love, grace, forgiveness, and community, and without it, we're lost. And we don't do that anymore.
I think chefs are sexy.
Well, since I'm the chef now, I guess I'm gonna give you a gift, and you just literally segue right to what I was gonna say. And this is gonna be my biggest takeaway from this entire thing. You just brought up that, and I said earlier about family, right? And so I think that we have forgotten as young adults that I'll tell you as a chef, I cannot cook for myself. What I mean by that is if I go to the store and I buy a whole chicken, I can't eat a whole chicken by myself because I'm so used to cooking for everyone else. And so one quick note, when I look at a recipe, an average person eats about 5 to 6 ounces of protein. So I'll start there. Starch is about 3 ounces, vegetables about 4 ounces. When we look at just from a cost standpoint and you being a student, you then maximize what that looks like, right? Then I take that into the grocery store and I try to do the same thing. Again, it's very difficult for me to do that because I go home and I got a whole chicken and it's only me. But to say that, it's something that we talk about at Mariano's and we talk about grocery stores and we talk about with the farmers. So like at the restaurant, I buy a whole chicken. So you go look and you say, well, what do I buy? Well, we buy 3.5 pound birds, right? And what I mean by that is if you take that bird or that chicken and you break it into 8 pieces, now you just fed yourself and probably 3 of your peers. So if you take one person, somebody makes chicken, somebody now takes the bones, they make a sauce, somebody got some vegetables, somebody got a starch, you got a meal for 3 days. And so you got to go, I said it earlier, going back to the basics, right? Because when I look at a recipe, because I tell people all the time, I can make good food at home if I'm not making money, if I'm not making a cost on that. And it's the same thing when we're at home. We're trying to find, if I go to the store, do I go back every day? The grocery stores are not necessarily set for the consumer to go back every day, except for what you said, because they have to look great. When you go into a store and it's depleted, you're going to walk right out of the store because then there's nothing in abundance. And I think that we have gotten so used to having things in abundance that we've forgotten when it's not necessarily accessible. What do you do when you need to stretch out what you have that is your abundance? So my suggestion is if you could buy more in bulk in small portions, then you're able to then do what we did during COVID, which was meal plan. And we've kind of strayed away from that to go back to what that meal plan is, because I can't be successful if I'm not planning what those meals are per day.
Mm-hmm. So home ec, bring back home ec is one of them. Question over there.
Good afternoon. I'm Athena Ramos. I'm with the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and I do research with farm workers across the Great Plains region. And one of the things that I'm not sure that a lot of folks here in the room know is that there's a lot of inequities in terms of the policies that are in place to protect farm workers. Whether that be from minimum wage requirements to protecting the right to collective bargaining and to unionize, to overtime, child labor protections, and so forth. There's a whole term for this called agricultural exceptionalism, meaning that agriculture as an industry plays by a different set of rules than pretty much everybody else. My question to the panel is, how? What is it going to take for us to protect farm workers and provide that sense of equity in terms of the policies that we as a nation abide by, so that we can acknowledge and value the contributions of these workers who we all know now are essential?
Very quickly, I would, and we talked about this earlier, we just finished the USDA Equity Commission recommendations. And there is an entire section on farm workers and recommendations for the Congress, recommendations for the administration that address every single issue that you just raised. So this is a conversation that is taking place as we speak. And there was just a conference in Tucson, Arizona to begin the community dialogue around these policies. So you're spot on, but just know you're not alone in Nebraska, that there are many people across the country looking to address these issues today.
Yeah, and I can also tell you that many of the laws that pertain to the issues you're talking about sit outside USDA jurisdiction, and they also sit at state legislative jurisdiction. Right. And so you've got a lot of states that are actually going the wrong direction on these issues right now. And they're actually allowing younger, and I mean, it's just, we're slip sliding backwards on a lot of these issues. But it is that mix, and I was really glad to see the Equity Commission lean so hard into that topic. Yep.
And I don't know if you guys read the book Tomatoland by Barry Eastman. And he was able to, he described slave-like conditions in the Florida tomato farming business. And he has been, and that book actually exposed a lot that got things changed a bit. But I had no idea there were, such awful conditions just because we wanted to keep tomatoes really, really, really cheap.
Yep.
So we've got 47 seconds left. Lightning round. If people take away one thing from this today, what should it be?
Food is sexy.
That's right. Woo!
You asked.
No, I think that, for those of us who can, we should be willing to pay more for our food because that is the only way the animals and the earth and the people are treated.
Yeah, and
properly.
I would add one more thing. I would say food is health. We are starting this conversation now that food is medicine. Food is medicine because the access to affordable, nutritious food is not provided universally to people across this country. And as a result, we have an increase in the amount of diet-related disease. If we make food affordable and accessible, and we drive the consumer demand that is necessary for the consumption of that food, we can reduce the amount of diet-related disease and embrace the idea that whether you live in a rural community or an urban community, that food is at the center of your health and your future.
Nice. Woo. All right, you got to follow that, Lamar.
I'd say food is sexy as well. But definitely, the biggest takeaway for me is, knowing that there is a great abundance of great food out here, and that the goal at the end of the day, respect the farmers, respect the stores, respect the food.
All right, give a hand to our panel.